Hello everyone, my name is Zach. Welcome back to my channel. Hope you're doing well today. Today we're going to go over all the books I read in May, which consist of 3 novels, 2 novellas, 2 poetry collections, and 5 graphic novels. So at the beginning of the month, I had just finished finals. I moved back into my parents' house and I was feeling a little bit brain dead. I was in a little bit of a reading slump, so I turned to an old friend, The Chronicles of Narnia. I've been slowly working through the Chronicles of Narnia series. I have a set that's in publication order, so I've been reading them in that order, and I'm currently on book number 3, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Voyage of the Dawn Treader centers around Edmund and Lucy as they return to Narnia with their cousin this time and reunite with Prince Caspian and a few other characters, and they sail upon a ship called the Dawn Treader seeking the end of the world. I gave this book a 4 out of 5, which I've given the other 2 books in the series so far the same rating. I really enjoyed that this was a bit different than the other Narnia books, which is just villain is trying to take over Narnia, we need to defeat them. It was more interesting to have kind of a ship's voyage be the central plot. It reads more like an anthology of stories where they stop by different islands and into different ports, and every time they stop, something wacky happens. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would highly recommend picking it up. I don't know that I'd say you should pick this one up first or that it's the most interesting Narnia book, but if you like Narnia, you like C.S. Lewis, you can't really go wrong with this. After that, I decided to reread an old favorite, and that is the novella The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Mr. Robert Louis Stevenson. This book centers around Dr. Jekyll, who seems to be going a little bit crazy, his health seems to be deteriorating, and he keeps disappearing, and while he's disappearing, this new guy shows up in town by the name of Mr. Hyde, and Mr. Hyde's kind of an asshole. This book was, of course, very influential to the horror and thriller genres, so if you like either of those genres and you haven't read this already, I recommend giving it a try because it's not very long. I only read the title novella. I didn't read the and other stories, which is included in this book. That's why it's so long. But I also gave this a 4 stars. It was a lot headier and slower than I remember it being when I read it in 9th grade, but I still really enjoyed it, and I still think it's worth a read if you like classics or you're trying to read classics and you want one that's short. The next thing I read in the month of May was 5 graphic novels. This was my introduction to graphic novels. I did read manga back in middle school, but it has been years, and this was my first time reading graphic novels proper. The first one I read was Silent Hill Downpour and Story. Let me ask you a question. Do you care about Silent Hill Downpour? No! And if you do, why? Either way, this graphic novel is not going to change your mind about the series. The plot's cliche, it kind of sucks, the art's not very good, the faces look nothing like they do in the game, which is just bizarre. The only thing they saved this from a 1 star was some good father-daughter rep, which I'm a sucker for, so this got a 2 from me. Don't read it, it's terrible. The next thing I read was Deadpool v. Gambit. This sounded like a guaranteed winner for me. You have Deadpool, the most adorably lame character from the X-Men universe, cross Deadpool, the king of the fourth wall break, one of the most beloved superheroes going around nowadays, with a title that suggests they're going to make fun of Batman v Superman. What could go wrong? This was a bind-up of a 5-issue series, and issue number 1 was great. There was a lot of funny jokes. I was really enjoying it. Both characters felt appropriate to how they should be. And then you hit issue number 2. When you get into the plot proper of this series, it was really confusing to me, and I thought it was just because I don't really read comics that often, so maybe I just didn't understand it because I needed more background in comics. But when I checked Goodreads reviews, a lot of people were saying the same thing, that the issues felt really disjointed. It didn't really feel like there was an overall story. And someone else said that it felt like a sampler of different series that happened to star both these characters and not one complete story arc. And I kind of agree. So this also got 2 stars. I was really disappointed by it. The next graphic novel I read was Stephen King's The Stand, Volume 1, Captain Trips. You would not believe how many takes it took me to get that title right. Anyway, this is part 1 of a graphic novel adaptation of Stephen King's longest book, The Stand, which centers around a pandemic that breaks out in the United States and everything that happens after most of the United States dies off. I was really intimidated to try The Stand because it's so long and just me and Mr. King have been on shaky ground lately, so I decided to pick up this instead to see if I would like it, and I really did. I thought the artwork was great. And I think the graphic novel format is really great for King because King is a bit of an overwriter. So like I would see a panel where they would say like, oh, this nurse helped spread the virus. And I could just imagine in my head, like in the book, this would probably be like 12 pages with just a dump of unnecessary information about this character who serves no greater purpose to the plot. So I think the graphic novel format might be a great one for King to cut down on some of that tendency to overwrite. I would absolutely love a Salem's Lot adaptation. But for now, I think I'm going to finish this series instead of reading The Stand because I really liked it. I gave this 4 stars. The next graphic novel I read was I Hate Fairyland Volume 1. I Hate Fairyland is about Gertrude, a girl who wishes to be taken to Fairyland and does, and is told she can return home if she gets a key to open a door back to her world. And 27 years later, she still hasn't done it. She's still trapped in the body of a young girl, but she is now older, cynical, and takes her hatred of Fairyland out on its residents. This book is messed up, it's twisted, it's gory, and it's absolutely hilarious. I read this late at night when I was tired, slightly buzzed, and if you haven't read this yet and you're of age, I highly recommend that combination because it just made this so funny, so fun to read. Every time I thought, okay, this gag is going to get old, Scotty Young found like a new twist on it, a new kind of fairy tale trope to make fun of, and I loved it. I definitely plan on continuing this. I really liked it. And then the last graphic novel I read I got from the library was Saga Volume 1, which focuses on Marco and Alana and the baby they have at the beginning of the first volume. I absolutely love this graphic novel. I see why it's so hyped up on BookTube, and I definitely think it deserves it. The artwork is really fresh and interesting. There's a lot of great monster designs. The plot is really fun and interesting, and I can't wait to see where the series goes, so I will be continuing on. 5 out of 5. After I finished reading my sampler of graphic novels, I tackled the much-beloved Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. I have a spoiler review of Six of Crows if you're interested. If I remember, I'll link it. But overall thoughts, I gave both of these books a 4 out of 5. I think they are just a smidge overhyped, but I still really enjoyed my time with these. I would recommend them if you're interested, even in the slightest. The universe is really great. The characters are all really great. I really enjoyed them. If you enjoy books that move really fast, these are definitely books for you. I kind of would have preferred a little bit more breadth between some of the sequences, especially when it comes to this book. But again, really like them. One more thing I quickly want to say about this book in particular, it has a bit of a reputation for being kind of emotional destroyer. And while part of the ending was kind of sad, it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it would be. I think this is partially because I read Mira Grant's Newsflash trilogy earlier this year, and she just rakes you over the emotional coals in those books. So with this book, I was kind of, oh, that's sad, but like, I've been through a lot worse. But I did really enjoy the actual final chapter ending, and the epilogue was absolutely great. I'm not sure that I want that third book that she's apparently thinking of writing. I kind of like where it ended, so I don't know, but I guess we'll see what happens. The next thing I read was the novella 1922 from the collection Full Dark, No Stars by Stephen King. I actually listened to this on audiobook, and the audiobook is fairly good for what it is, but the novella wasn't quite up to snuff in my opinion. In the story, we follow Wilfred, whose wife has inherited 100 acres just off of their family farm, and she plans on selling it to a hog butchery, which Wilfred doesn't want because he thinks the blood will pollute the river and that the smell will be unbearable, and he does not want that on his farm. So he hatches and enacts a plan to make sure those 100 acres stay his forever and that he can keep the family farm safe. I don't think the premise of this book is really bad, but I have two main complaints. Number one, this book borrows heavily from Dolores Claiborne, but the main character is not nearly as likable or as sympathetic as Dolores Claiborne in this book, and the prose isn't nearly as interesting as it is in Dolores Claiborne. Number two, Stephen King has a weird obsession with rats, and he keeps bringing them back in this book, and it's just a really lazy thing because a lot of people think rats are creepy, and so I just wish he wouldn't. Just stop, please. Overall, I gave this a 2 out of 5. I don't think it's a terrible novella, but I feel like it could have been written a lot better, and I spent the whole book going, am I supposed to be rooting for you? Are you supposed to be likable? Because I can't really tell. And the last two things I read were poetry collections because I'm starting to feel this book buying ban. I miss going to the bookstore and picking out books because I'm a collector with a problem. So I decided to knock out my 2 poetry collections that I own. The first of which was the complete poetry of Edgar Allan Poe. I'm really sad I didn't love this more than I did. I really love Poe's short stories, but his poetry just wasn't really for me. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 because I don't really think it's bad, but also it just didn't do much for me. And the last thing I read was A Crow with No Mouth. This is a Zen poetry collection from a Buddhist monk whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce, so I will put it up on the screen somewhere. And this was kind of fascinating to me. I actually bought this book for a Introduction to Religious Text class that I signed up for and ended up dropping a few weeks in, and this was the only thing I kept because it sounded really interesting. The way my professor described it, I guess the author of these poems decided that instead of rejecting kind of the physical pleasures of the world and temptation of physical pleasures of the world, he would fully embrace them and use that as part of his transcendence into nirvana. And I thought that sounded really interesting, so I decided to keep this and read it, and I'm really glad I did. All these poems are 2-line couplets, and they're all really interesting, and there's actually a large variety. There's, your typical Zen nature poetry, but there's also, like disses to the other Buddhist monks that he didn't like, and there's also some adult poems. You know what I'm saying. As I said, I really like this. I gave this a 4 out of 5. I would recommend getting it from the library if you can, just because it's really short. It's 80 pages, and most of the pages look like that. But overall, it's something really different. If you like poetry or you're maybe trying something a little different like I wanted to, I would recommend it. So that is it. That is everything I read in May. I hope you enjoyed. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Feel free to subscribe if you feel so inclined, and I will see you next time.